thank you everyone for coming out this evening or this afternoon. I'm Trident's Marketing Communications Manager, Daniel Sloan, and we're excited to be bringing you today's Culture of Research and Education webinar called Leadership and Perceived Leader Effectiveness in IT Project Success. And presenter today will be Ph.D. alum, Dr. John Sinclair. The core webinar series is designed to provide faculty, students, and alumni an opportunity to share their research and scholarship with the Trident community. By fostering a culture of professional development and idea exchange, participants will have access to a valuable forum for lifelong learning. This university-wide effort is led by Trident's Doctoral Studies directors. Just a few notes before introduce today's host and presenter. There'll be a presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. And you can ask questions one of two ways. Just submit it in the chat box at the bottom of the screen, or at the end of the presentation, just simply raise your hands. I'll call on you, and you can ask your question that way, and I'll make sure you're unmuted, of course. And we'll give a reminder at the end of the presentation. So let's introduce today's host. It's Dr. Indira Guzman. She's the Doctoral Studies Director in the Glenn R. Jones College of Business, and a professor of IT management. She's been a faculty member and dissertation mentor at Trident since 2006. Her research has been published in over 50 academic outlets. Welcome, Dr. Guzman. I'm going to hand the reins off to you to introduce tonight's presenter.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Daniel. Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining today's presentation. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. John Sinclair. Dr. John Sinclair is an alumni, a graduate from the Ph.D. program in Business Administration in the College of Business. He's a founder of Positive Trends Research and director of Options and Derivatives Education, where he helps others learn, grow, and become successful in business, stock, futures, and option markets. Before forming his company, Dr. Sinclair earned his MBA after serving as a nuclear officer in the U.S. Navy. Before the Navy, Dr. Sinclair earned his bachelor's degree with dual majors in computer science, engineering, and mathematics from University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Sinclair was always fascinated with businesses, especially leadership, and that's why in his PhD, he has done work in leadership, but also with a lot of influence from working abroad, especially in the Asia Pacific, in China and Japan. He's also a certified project manager. And he writes a lot and recently published a book on the subject on financial markets, which is available on Amazon. And it's entitled The Secret of Trading the Open, which is a top seller on option trading. So Dr. Sinclair has recorded over 5,000 educational videos, many of which are publicly available on YouTube for the public. So we are just very happy and appreciate very much that Dr. Sinclair accepted our invitation to share here today the research that he completed as a PhD student at Trident, and also some of the exciting things that he is doing as a professional. So with that, I ask that you give the full attention to Dr. Sinclair and help me in welcoming her to the stage. Dr. Sinclair.
Thank you, Dr. Guzman. I really appreciate it, and thank you everybody for being here. It's a distinct honor to have been invited, and I'm happy to have been here. So to be able to present. So today I'd like to go over the research that I did for the dissertation for the PhD program at Trident. And so part of that is what I want to do is talk about understanding that the process of writing the dissertation and going through the that whole process to help folks that are out there that may be interested in pursuing their PhD or DBA at Trident, or those who are currently enrolled and maybe have some questions or just kind of want to see a little bit how how one could be presented, and this one was presented successfully. So so hopefully you will find that helpful. So I just want to give some recognition to the committee that served. My chair was Dr. Nicholas Bowersox, an excellent chair, and really helped with a lot of guidance along the way. Of course, Dr. Guzman has also been was instrumental in providing guidance through the entire process as well. Even, especially before the PhD presentation and the dissertation formation throughout the entire program. So again, very special thank you to Dr. Guzman, and of course for being here. There are also two Trident faculty that were helpful and part of the committee, Dr. Corcoran, Dr. Baker. So special thanks to everybody on the committee. My dissertation is available on ProQuest. There's a link here, which I think will be made available after once the core lecture, the core presentation is posted. And the title of the dissertation was Analysis of Leadership and Perceived Leader Effectiveness in IT Project Success. So you are able to actually read the dissertation. If you're working on your dissertation, it is something that you can read that was recently accepted not only by the university but through ProQuest and their channels for the dissertation approval. So it may offer some guidance if you're interested in learning on that, and also it may give some interesting information on the topic. And so today we're gonna go through a little bit of the dissertation itself, but I'd also like to, I'll probably segue a little bit occasionally to kind of talk about the process of putting this together, so that it may answer some of your questions that you're having about putting together your dissertation and getting ready for the PhD. And I may even touch on some classes that I felt were very important that maybe I wish I paid a little more attention to when heading into the actual dissertation writing, and maybe you can find that helpful in your journey to getting your PhD. So today in the agenda, we're going to go through the introduction of the topic. We'll talk about the problem on it and the purpose and significance of the research, and also a very important part is the research questions and hypotheses. We'll go over the theoretical framework, the research method, study variables, participants and sample. We'll definitely touch on the quantitative side of things. Is kind of a little bit of a difference there for those of you who are looking to do the DBA, or those of you who are looking to do the PhD. There's a little bit more on the quantitative side, I believe, on the PhD side, and it can be a little. Those are probably some of the classes that once we get to it that you want to pay a little more attention in, because it's very important, right? It's a huge section of the dissertation itself, so we'll touch on that a little bit too as well. Instrumentation, validity, reliability, data collection. I'll talk to you a little bit about where I gathered my data and how. Again, like we said, instrumentation, validity, reliability, data construction, results. We'll talk about some sample characteristics, analyses, practical implications, theoretical implications, limitations, recommendations, and we'll wrap up. And like I said, throughout the slides, I'll probably touch on a few things about maybe some kind of ring the bell type of alerts where you might want to kind of zone in and that may help you with your research. So for the introduction. I selected leadership. I thought this was really, when we start the dissertation process, or we get into the PhD process, it does help to have a strong clue of maybe what your goal is and what you want to do with the research that you've done, and how it relates. The great part about Trident is that Trident attracts working a lot of folks who are in industry and maybe have not been in academia their entire lives, and it really gives a kind of a for me, I hadn't been back to school in at least 10 years, and it was really kind of a re-immersion back into the whole academic process, and really kind of an interesting experience with that. And so I think if you do your research in whatever field you're in, it can be extremely helpful. And I would highly look at the possibilities of doing that. One of the big things, though, if you're going to be doing data collection, is to ensure that the industry that you're in has the ability to collect that data. And so that was one of the challenges that I had, because as you may have seen from the introduction, my background was in nuclear engine. Well, before that was in engineering, and then nuclear technology from the Navy, and then nuclear project management. And it really turned out that, and I really like this, because the original goal for me for the PhD was actually to move up within my company, and to have more credentials, to continue to move up with the company. But life being as it can be sometimes, as it comes at you through a series of mergers and acquisitions, there was the opportunity for that ended up not coming to fruition, and so I ended up starting my own company. And so, and really, honestly, along the way, having that information, having that experience is actually really helpful. And so my goal was to complete the dissertation, to complete the PhD on my own while running the company, and so that made it a little bit more challenging and at times a bit stressful. So about picking the topic, I just wanted to kind of hammer in on this really quickly, is that if you can find a topic that is related to what your work is, your line of work, and are able to gather that information to analyze, it can be a lot easier. My background in engineering before nuclear was IT. And so I spent a lot of several years programming and doing engineering management in the IT sector. So it turned out that this sector was not necessarily easier, but there was a lot more opportunities to gather information for the research that I wanted to do, as opposed to collecting data from nuclear power plants in Japan. Right. So this was so I think it's really important to make sure that there's people available that you can get that you can elicit the data from. For instance, my one of my colleagues worked in the the military sector still, and it was relatively easy for them to get the information, to get the data, because it was the community was large enough, and the leadership topic that they selected was very good, right? So if it depends on the topic that you want to do. So I just kind of wanted to just touch on that for you. So we'll jump back in here into the dissertation. So that's why the research here was in IT leadership, as opposed to nuclear management. There just wasn't there just wasn't the type of data needed to be able to do the research. So, however, the topics were still relevant, and so I wanted to delve into that the topic of leadership, because I thought it was important. So again, there was research on leadership in the context of project management. Being a project management professional, it was my opinion that it was the style of leadership of a project manager that heavily influenced the outcome of projects. And what's interesting is sometimes our opinion doesn't necessarily correspond with the research, and we'll get into that a little bit as we run through the presentation. So like I said, there has been research out there on the topic. However, there was little known about the relationships between leadership style, perceived leader effectiveness, and measures of project success, and in specific context with the IT industry. So that was the end of the introduction there, or at least the first part. So no single leadership style is effective for all project scenarios. So it's important to examine leadership and project success within the context of individual industries to better understand ways to improve the success of projects. So because projects are often timely and expensive, effective leadership is necessary to ensure project success, as well as continued growth and stability of the IT industry. So again, as part of the process, we have to identify the problem. And so the problem of the study was that poor leadership, and what I determined is that poor leadership can undermine project success. And anybody who's been on a project, and especially been out there, probably can relate to that. Leading projects go over budget and beyond schedule. If you've had a project manager or a leader of a project who has good leadership skills and good ability to influence and motivate, sometimes, right, as you notice, as somebody who's working on the project, we're more motivated to do that. So a need exists to understand those leadership styles, and at least I thought so, and the research essentially also corresponded with that most strongly associated with project success and perceived effectiveness. So in addition, a lack of research existed on leadership styles associated with increased project success in the IT industry. So to facilitate effective industry growth, the success of individual projects with IT organizations is essential. Anybody who's worked on IT projects knows this, right? So we have to, and especially now, you know, over the last few years, which made this this project or this dissertation really interesting, is, or even more interesting, is the leveraging the non-running projects when we're away from each other. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into the potential for continued research on this. So. Because project leadership has strong influence on project success, a better understanding of the leadership styles that are most effective for projects may lead to targeted leadership development and training that provides project managers with the skills required to facilitate greater project success. So the purpose of the study was to examine the relationships between leadership style, transactional and transformational. And these are important if you're doing a leadership dissertation to understand the difference between these. The perceived leadership effectiveness, and then project success within the IT industry. So this gets interesting as we start to work on our dissertation, because we start to try to understand how we define project success, and then how we actually dig into that data to figure out if a project's been successful. So that's an important part of working on the dissertations as well. So really the key is, and this is a good influence from Dr. Guzman too, is being able to dig into prior research and understand that the study leveraged, right, so that you can use prior research to help you understand, to help understand, or at least research prior data to see where the research may go, or where at least parts of it may have been. So this study leveraged 3 indicators of project success, including timely project completion, top management support, and customer satisfaction with project output. So again, for a project to be successful, it has to be completed, right? And we like to see support of the stakeholders, including the customer. So although research exists on leadership in the context of project management, little is known about the relationship between the styles of leadership, perceived leader effectiveness, and the measure of project success in the IT industry. Okay, yeah, very good. And so, yeah, so as we kind of move on, so what I want to talk about here, guys, these are the research questions and hypotheses. So as you're working on your dissertation, one of the big things that we want to come up with is whether or not leadership style, or whether or not your primary research question makes sense for the research that you're going to do. Sometimes the research that we do can seem generally straightforward, but sometimes there's angles of it that can change how we look at it. And so so the process of forming the dissertation and coming up with the hypotheses isn't just like a, let me write these down and this is what I think, right? So what we do is at least what I did is I came up with a few general questions and to try to guide the research. And the first one, as you can see here, the primary research, does leadership style affect project success on IT projects? And so a lot may just kind of come out there and say, yeah, of course it does, right? But is there any data to support that? And so so when we get into this and we analyze this, there's multiple hypotheses that can actually lead into the data analysis that we do. And so so that just kind of leads me into the initial segue into when you get into your quantitative, if you're taking quantitative classes to prepare for the PhD, very important stuff, right? So paying it particular attention to using IBM SPSS. If you're not a statistician and are not familiar with using these tools, Trident offers the opportunities to use those and get good. And they've has some great professors that have taught. I had an excellent professor who taught using the tools. And there's other various ones that are out there as well. But what it does basically is you can plug in your hypotheses and you can crank out some answers, and then you have to be able to analyze that and determine whether or not the research that you're doing even makes sense. And if so, a lot of times the data, once you get good at analyzing the data, which you will in your classes, that you can start to make these connections and draw these hypotheses to conclusions. So just to kind of touch on a couple of points here, like one, hypothesis one, transformational leadership is positively correlated with leader effectiveness. And you can see how this kind of moves on, right? We're taking these different areas right here and developing different hypotheses to try to get that data to analyze it, right? We're not just writing one of the things I kind of wanted to touch on is with the PhD is we're not just writing a research paper and, like we do, throughout almost our entire career. Now we're proposing some questions, and it's not like we have our conclusion developed ahead of time. And I think that's really kind of one of the big parts that can be the most challenging when writing the dissertation. And so we'll talk a little bit about writing here along the way, but I just wanted to kind of touch on these here so you can see the hypotheses. So again, I think that's probably good to move from there. So then we got into the theoretical framework of the process. So I used the full range leadership model, basically stating that leadership was either transactional or transformational. And this is core stuff to leadership. So if you guys are doing your dissertation in leadership, this is just like it basically covers the full range model. Transactional leaders motivate followers, and transformational leaders motivate through social exchanges, and transformational leaders motivate followers through inspiration. And so we also talk about non-leadership or laissez-faire leadership is kind of a hands-off leadership. A lot of times we see that in the IT industry, especially when work is done remotely. But the FRLM was selected because it aligned directly with the research questions, the problem and purpose. So once again, just kind of hitting on the difference between doing like a major research paper and doing this is that we're kind of coming up with these questions, and we almost want to know, instead of having the conclusion predetermined in our minds, we almost want to be surprised by the solution that our data comes up with, and then we're able to write about it a little bit more. I think when you have that open mind about it, it becomes less laborsome to work on the dissertation. And so there's plenty of resources out there and books about how to budget your time when writing the dissertation. It's a little bit more challenging when we're working and things, and we're not sitting at the school, and our committee chairmen, we're working in the same laboratory as them, or whatever the situation is, or in the same office. And we're always bouncing questions off them. There's a lot of kind of surprise yourself type stuff. And I would say every time you get surprised by something, write it down, take a note, and because it'll probably at least be a talking point for your defense. Okay, so that was the theoretical framework for this. In this case, the research method, the nature of the research was quantitative. There are other methods out there to do research. I selected quantitative. Followed cross-sectional correlation design. I selected quantitative because I liked the idea of analyzing data. And I also, having a background in data and in IT, it's pretty fun using the software and seeing what pops out, basically. So the aim of the study that I did was to explore statistical significance of relationships between predetermined variables. So a quantitative method was selected for that. These were the study variables that we used. So we used the independent variables, transformational and transactional leadership. We also had dependent variables, which was the project success and the perceived leadership effectiveness. And so, perceived leadership effectiveness is determined as a mediator in the relationship between leadership style and project success. So this is part of the tools that we use, right? So you can see if you look at this slide, it seems almost just like it would be a straight line, right? Going into, well, if you have, it's either this model or this model of leadership, and we see how the perceived leadership effective goes, and then we determine whether or not there's success. So it can be very straightforward like that, but it's just not as exciting, right? So when we looked at the hypotheses on those, we can see that some of the hypotheses that we mentioned can actually directly affect project success. So you can see those go directly to it, but some of them actually go into the perceived leadership effectiveness. So it gives us a little more to analyze. And as we break these apart, it helps us to establish our conclusions a little bit better. So this is the model that I initially used. So participants and sample size, this is maybe an interesting question for you too. Like we said, like I initially was saying in the beginning of the in the discussion, when picking your dissertation topic, obviously you'll want to work with your chair and Dr. Guzman or whoever's involved in your committee that ideally that you have a good relationship with in prior classes, and possibly even have a similar topic or at least a similar background. So I didn't know this going into it, but I lucked out. Dr. Bowersox happened to do his dissertation on leadership as well, and had models that were our conversations about this were fruitful. And it doesn't mean that there's not a general model that can be followed for working on a dissertation, but it can be helpful, especially if we're working to be able to bounce these ideas in a very effective way. So in the case here, where I picked participants and sample sizes, like I said, when picking the topic, you want to see how you can come up with the data. And so I was able to get IT data, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it here in the presentation, but I used a tool called MTurk, which is basically kind of like an Amazon-based tool where you can broadly reach out, and through using, of course, the appropriate guidelines for gathering information, can reach out to the community. So I did a power analysis on this. I did majority non-managerial. We did have some managerial through the process, but I did a power analysis on that. So and was able to get a sample size of over 200 respondents. So ultimately 200 on that. So another key tool as well is picking your instrumentation. So if you're not familiar with this, there are tools out there. There are questionnaires essentially that are out there. So the MLQ is classic for leadership, right? There's 45 items on this one. You use a Likert scale. So the different tools that are out there also help to use the analysis. Now, there are methods that are out there where you can create your own tools, but this can make the process a lot longer. So it all depends on the research that you're doing. Again, project success. Now this was tough, right? So how to figure out project success. I lucked out. Again, there's a lot of luck involved in this. So being a project management professional, I was privy to, or I am privy to the PMP, the PMI, the Project Management Institute group, right, which is huge, right? It's all around the world. And so, and there's a lot of information there. And in this group, I found the project implementation profile, the PIP, and extremely helpful tool, vetted tool to help evaluate project success. And so there are 100 questions on this one, and you still have to be careful with the amount of questions and analysis because it can take things down through a whole new road. But this was a major part of determining whether a project was successful. And then fortunately we found I found another one called perceived leader effectiveness. So so this was interesting. It was a 2-question survey, but it was a fully vetted questionnaire. So whew, another lucky one on that one. So but you can see that when you're plotting this stuff out and when you're planning this stuff out, it's important to really keep the plan together in your mind, right? And so when you're asking these questions and you come up with these hypotheses, how are you going to ask these questions, right? And if there's nothing out there, really sometimes you have to go back, you really have to come up with a game plan and brainstorm. And I would work closely, like I said, with your department chair or your committee chair. So I said it's good to have a good relationship with that. If you found a professor that you like and they've done research that's in the field that you like, I think that's extremely helpful. And Trident has a lot of those there. And so like I said, Dr. Bowersox was in leadership with me. And so we could brainstorm and be like, okay, well, if I want to go this direction, where can I find, how can I collect this data? And is there anything that is out there that where I can obtain the information? So so again, and there was a demographic questionnaire there as well in the dissertation. And yeah, so exactly. So this is right here, like I said, a vetted or validity, valid and reliable is a common term used in the academic world, the academic space. And so it basically, you need to talk about it, and sometimes you need to prove it. Sometimes you need to prove that the MLQ is valid and reliable, because it may not be necessarily for the hypotheses that you have. So sometimes you still take the data here and plug it through and try to show that it is actually valid and reliable. And I got by the skin of my teeth on this one. I think it became just, based on the research I was doing, it became just valid and reliable. So that can be a part of it too. And a lot of this stuff, you can do a lot of this legwork up front. I would say that's a good idea. So, but yeah, so these were valid and reliable, like I said, the PIP and the MLQ as well. And like I said, usually if you go to a source, like where the MLQ comes from, a lot of times they are, and as long as you've seen them used in a similar fashion through your research, that can be helpful as well. Data collection, like I said, I used the MTurk tool. Here's the different criteria. It was an online survey. I found this tool. I learned about this tool. I thought I was going to be doing, what was it? What's the other popular? Basically, this was the tool to use for me to get the amount of respondents that I was looking for, and using like survey.com and different survey websites out there. Sometimes you can't get the amount of respondents out there, and this ended up being a great one to use, and I was very happy with it. For data analysis, again, I initially used multiple linear regression. We're just going to stick with that here for the sake of this presentation. It is possible that your committee could request that you do a different model for your analysis. If they do, and you really, so one of the key things I want to say is it's important to own your dissertation, right? At least as best as you can, and because your committee will challenge you, and I think that's kind of looking back, I think that's an important part. It can be frustrating, but they will challenge you, and the dissertation presentation, sometimes there could be some random questions there. A lot of times it's kind of cookie cutter, but if, like, for instance, instead of multiple linear regression, if you're going to use this as a tool and you want to defend that as the tool that's best to use for your dissertation, you need to be able to do that, right? So that's I think that's just an important side note there. So, but anyways, part of the data analysis, took raw data and used SPSS for analysis. On that, also did a pilot study, and this is recommended, suggested, and it makes sense, and it's actually a good way to assess the validity or the effectiveness of the tools that you're using. So when I used MTurk for the pilot study, I was like, oh, this is great, right? There's no it was hardly any lag time in getting the responses. So I was very, very happy with it. Like I said, I did 201 surveys to make sure I hit the 200 mark. And then of course you remove your outliers, and that gives you that gave me a final sample size of 199. These are different characteristics. You can peruse these through the slide deck later. Pretty straightforward, right? Everything from from age to role. And then we'll just kind of, if it's okay with everybody here, we'll kind of just go through the hypotheses a bit. We won't get into the full amount, although I will say it is important to understand what's significant, right? And so, in this case, right? So once you get skilled at using your tools, your SPSS tools, and from your quantitative classes that you take at Trident, that when you're using linear regression, you want to know what is going to become significant for you. So you can see here the data that I held or that I had for the hypothesis 1 was significant, and the null hypothesis was rejected. H2 also very similar, right? I wanted to see that transactional leadership was possibly correlated with perceived leader effectiveness. You could see that using the tools that transactional leadership did significantly predict leader effectiveness, which I thought was pretty interesting, and also the null hypothesis was rejected there as well. H3 again, perceived leader effectiveness is possibly correlated with project success. Again, was able to determine from the data that perceived leader effectiveness significantly predicted project success. Also was able to find, the question was whether transformational leadership was possibly correlated with project success. And this also helped us determine that transformational leaders did significantly predict project success. So it's kind of interesting, right? So we're seeing that multiple leadership styles can affect it. And transactional leaders project success, again, similarly, transactional project leaders significantly predicted project success using the statistical data. Hypothesis 6. So this was interesting. So perceived leader effectiveness mediates. So using the mediator variables, this kind of gave us a little more depth to the presentation, a little more meat to it. And so so here where we said that perceived leader effectiveness mediated the relationship between transformational leadership and project success, it's got a little bit tricky. And it can get tricky. And so again, just working with your mentors and with your committee on this by bouncing these questions off can really help a lot. So we did a mediation analysis to assess if perceived leader effectiveness mediated the relationship between transformational leadership and project success, and we couldn't reject it with significant evidence. So so this makes things a little bit interesting. So it suggested that perceived leader effectiveness was not a significant mediator for the relationship between transformational leadership and project success. And this is one of those like, huh? Type things, whereas when I was working on a project and not a project manager on it, in my mind that the perceived leader, how I perceived the leader would seem to affect, at least it did for me, at least I thought it did, but statistically it doesn't, at least in the IT sector. So I found that to be pretty interesting. Right. And hypothesis 7, this is also the same thing too. So that suggested that perceived leader effectiveness was not a significant mediator for the relation between transactional leadership and project. So it kind of showed that yes, leadership is important for the success of projects, but how we perceive them is not necessarily a mediator, a significant mediator statistically. And so this led to theoretical implications, right? And that's an important part of it. And like I said, this is when we're doing the data analysis, the next big thing, the next important thing when putting the dissertation together is the writing of it. And so being able to interpret this data, I think it's extremely helpful to be able to know what the data means, what the results of the data means, and then to be able to say to yourself, wow, that's completely not what I thought it was going to do, and then to be able to write about that. And what I found to be really cool is that that it's okay. It's okay that what I thought or what you think is going to be the correct outcome is not necessarily going to be the case. And like I said, and I just wanted to hit back on that. The things that surprise you along the way are definitely things to take notes on and think about. So when you sit down and go through the process of writing about it, it's easy to expand on it. As you've probably noticed, I like to expand on things. So that's in there. So yeah, so in this case here in my dissertation, that the perceived and actual effectiveness of leadership style may vary by industry, but also by organizational structure. So there's practical implications for this. I think this is important research for the IT industry. It shows that project success may be less reliant on the type of leadership employed, but just the presence of strong leadership is a possibility. It showed that IT workers may be more adaptable to different styles of leadership, that IT workers could value both types of leadership equally and significantly to them. And it also shows that leaders themselves in the industry may concern themselves less with the type of leader they are, but rather just have strong leadership traits to help move the project forward. And this is beneficial, right? So this is beneficial for organizations to help leaders grow in their organizations, to not necessarily be at least in the IT industry, to not necessarily be a certain type of leader, but rather to amplify their strong traits to help move the project forward. And like I said, that's one of my favorite parts about what we do and about doing research is that we have not only the opportunity to help others, help the industry itself, which is a lot of folks that go to Trident are industry professionals and can help. And the dissertation themselves is something that you might want to consider. May actually help. Like I said, when I started, my goal was to help move up within the organization. And if you're doing research that touches on a problem that your company needs to solve, you may actually solve a problem for your company and save them millions of dollars, either in training or in other work, and that could help you move up within your organization. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're working on this too. So again, things got a little, like I said, it got a little bit different for me as I delved into my own company. But I think it can be effective for your growth within your organization as well. And Trident did a great job with the whole process. So again, just kind of there's limitations on it, right? So again, like I said, we only looked at the IT industry. The survey was long. This is all sorts of things that you'll touch on when you're going through your PhD. Recommendations, and again, so like I said, it's not only I think helping yourself within your organization is one possibility, but you're also helping other researchers, right? So the cool part, the great part about working on a PhD is you become a part of academia, and you're helping other researchers maybe go on, do their research, right? So there's possible areas where you can take these, where you can take your research, and other researchers can take your research. So it's something to consider too. And so now that this is published, and this is something too that you can look into as well, as if you're looking into leadership. So there's qualitative, like I said, I did quantitative research. There's also the qualitative side of things, which some prefer to work on. For me, it was not necessarily easier to do quantitative, but it was for me, it was more interesting. So. And so really in conclusion, not to necessarily conclude on my research, but to kind of conclude overall with the process of writing a dissertation for business. Sure, my research I think filled a gap, right? It addressed a gap between the research that's been out there on leadership, and I thought it was important to understand this. It was certainly important to me. Having been in multiple projects where my determination was that the leader, the perceived leader effectiveness was motivational or not, and I think that that the research is helpful and also helps expand the academic side of things as well. And that's, I think, part of the whole process when you're working on the dissertation is to have that plan of where this might go for you, whether it's within your current organization, how maybe you could come up with a problem that your current organization has, and you can use your research to help solve that problem, or it could just be to help out the field of research and expand that as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here in this space, and so I think it will be pretty interesting for the future to see what type of research comes out on it. And that hopefully gives you an overview of the process of writing the dissertation. We didn't get too much in the woods of my actual research, although we did hit on a lot of topics. I think we brushed, we gave you a good flavor of what the research was and what the conclusions were and why we did it. And hopefully it was able to give a smattering of how we think about writing it and how we use the statistical data, which, like I said, pay attention in those classes and befriend your professor there. If you do not understand it, how to get your hypotheses into conclusions and determine whether or not it's statistically significant, then it can be a big barrier for your research if you're taking the quantitative approach. So anyway, I hope you found this discussion helpful, and I really want to thank Daniel and Dr. Guzman for having me here today, and I hope you found this edifying and for your future career and your future pursuit of either a DBA or a PhD at Trident.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sinclair. I just want to highlight some of the things that you said. I think it's very important for PhD students but also other doctoral students. For example, the importance of your topic. There are lots of studies on leadership, but the fact that you focus on project success in IT projects, I think it added something more specific to the field. So there are lots of studies on IT professionals, on IT projects, but not on leadership. So that's definitely the gap that you feel with your research. And that's something that you want to look in any dissertation, is finding that gap that you can feel, right? Making your dissertation, your research special and unique. So that was great. I also liked your emphasis on taking notes, taking notes because they will definitely help you ask questions later as you're doing in the process, or later on, as you said, taking notes that will help you find the surprises, expand on it with the literature, compare with previous findings. I mean, just that ability to, that curiosity and ability to capture that curiosity into notes that then will be converted into part of your text. I think that's something remarkable and an advice that we can all take on. I also I wanted to emphasize that your dissertation, you ended the program in summer 2020 for all the other students who are here. And since then, there have been some changes. I mean, we're always improving the program. And I think one of the things, because sometimes you mention how you had to go through the process, but we added some tools to the PhD program now. It's on our LibGuides page. So I just want to emphasize for anybody who's still in the PhD program, the LibGuides page, the resources pages for the doctoral programs now have lots of tools that help students on some of the challenges that Dr. Sinclair, for example, faced when he was in the program. So we are constantly working, and I know Dr. Cromer is here. Dr. Cromer is the professor of doctoral studies for the PhD program, and we have been working on adding tools for PhD students, and that again are in the resources pages on LibGuides. I'm going to post the link here as well, but I just wanted to mention that that's something that if you are in again the PhD program, you want to look at that. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Sinclair. Great comments, and I'm looking forward to the questions from the audience about the work that he has done, or the doctoral programs in the College of Business in general. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sinclair. Thank you, Dr. Guzman. There's a few questions in already, and if you have questions, just type them in the chat box or raise your hand. I'll unmute you and you can ask your question to Dr. Sinclair or Dr. Guzman. But let's start off with Dr. Sinclair. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes between when you completed your dissertation and now with respect to the environment in which a lot of people do their work. There's a lot more people who are working off-site now. How do you think your dissertation would change if you started doing it today versus when you originally started it?
I think that's a great question, and I really think that this, as horrible as the pandemic has been, I think it's really opened up a whole new world of research potential. And if you're looking for a topic to write on, I think there's so much that can be done with this. So as I was working on this, it was through as I was wrapping up my PhD, it was through the kind of the early stages of the pandemic, and we posed those as questions, and we posed those as potential future research to be done. And I still think there's so much that can be involved. There's so many different possible topics that are out there, not only in the leadership field, but anywhere in business that can, I think that could help organizations understand how to leverage the tools, the web tools that they have, now the metaverse that's out there to potentially that could be used as research ground. So certainly there's so much that's changed, but so much potential for future research.
Great, thanks for that. And speaking in the metaverse, one of our PhD in education graduates who's actually just published a book on the metaverse. And when Dr. Sinclair is answering the next question, I'll include that link in the chat box in case anyone's interested. The next question for you, Dr. Sinclair, how were you able to navigate any issues you may have had with employing your research within your in your place of work?
Exactly, and I think that's something to consider. As we kind of talked about when we were running through the slide deck, is when you're picking your research. I don't think it would be a horrible idea to talk to a supervisor or somebody else within your organization that thinks there's a problem that needs to be solved, that maybe they don't have the resources right now to do it, but you can dedicate your resources to it in your spare time to do the research to help your organization. So like I said, my background is a little bit, everything changes, right? Life comes at us, we have to adapt. And so I ended up starting my own organization. And it's funny, because as I was finishing up my PhD, I was like, oh, wow, I want to start all over and do it with this, because it'd be so significant and I could get really great data. And then I was like, well, I'll just do another PhD. And so there is that as a possibility as well. And but I would just keep in consideration of your organization's needs, and how you can help your organization with the research that you're doing.
Okay, great, thank you. And looks like we have one more question. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, the chat box or raise your hand. Question is, for students who have a little trouble when it comes to quant analysis, do you have any recommendations for them, whether it be while in the program or during the research phase of their dissertation, on how they can overcome those challenges?
I think Dr. Guzman might be able to elaborate on a little more, because I learned from her about it. So, but again, in the PhD program, you establish early on what's going to work the best for you. And for me, it was right away. It was the quantitative sides of things. I like the idea of being able to get the data, to be able to work with it, and be able to formulate conclusions from that. It just made the most sense for me and my background, and also the research that I was going to do. But there are other, the qualitative methods. There are strong ways to go about that as well, but just was not up my alley, I suppose.
Yeah, I just want to add to that is that we have now in the College of Business the PhD program and the DBA program. So we really emphasize in the PhD program, students do their dissertations quantitative, or they can include some qualitative components and make it mixed methods, but quantitative primarily. And it still has to have quantitative components. On the other hand, in the DBA, it's the other way around. It has to have qualitative components with maybe some additional quantitative descriptive components, but mainly qualitative. So the PhD is mainly quantitative, where we test hypotheses, we discuss generalizability, whereas in the DBA, we do not discuss generalizability, and most of our students do a case study in a single organization. So that's also differentiation for us.
Great, thank you, Dr. Guzman. And Dr. Sinclair, how did you find the IT project management hypothesis for your specific topic? And second part, did you pay for the PIP from PMI or just the membership?
Right. So again, with that, in terms of picking the hypotheses, a lot of times it's back and forth with your committee chair to see what makes sense, and then really see if it makes sense with the data that you're planning to get. And so, I mean, honestly, sometimes it changes along the way. So it's not like you just it's like writing a dissertation is just cookie cutter and you just kind of go in there. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth and massaging and making it make sense to the field, and really sometimes it seems really frustrating with the going back and forth and working on that. But it really, when it comes out, Trident really does a good job and helps us come out with a good finished product, and so that's really one of the impressive parts of it. So yeah, so the hypotheses, when coming up with it, a lot of times it's a work in progress. I mean, maybe you get it all right the first time, and it all works that way. But you'll get good at it. You'll get to practice it. And if you're doing the quantitative methods, you'll see what makes sense for plugging them into your models and seeing if it's how the data works. And so so that's kind of one of the main ones. What was the second part of that question? Sorry.
Yeah, give me I thought I could remember it, but I guess memory's going in my old age. But did you pay for the PIP from PMI or just the membership?
And that's a good question too. So PMI, well, you don't, yeah. So PMI, right? You become a member of it as a project management professional, and then you pay for it on top of it as well. But the membership lasts a long time once you're in it. So that helped to be able to do that. But yeah, with getting the data, it requires getting permission, and in some cases, some are publicly available. But with things like the MLQ, right? Those, and some other resources that are owned, right, or essentially the questionnaires released out, you will have to look at paying for that. So getting the PhD obviously is not a free process, right? And there's some money that needs to be paid for different things, for different tools, right? So if you're going to do your surveys, depending on how you do it, right, depending on your organization. So I didn't have, at the time, I was not privy to an organization with a lot of people that I could send out information to and get questions answered free, right? So MTurk is you pay for people to fill out your surveys, right? And so it's important to also have a budget, but at the same time, it's being in, if you're working on your PhD and paying for and working at the same time, then just I think it's important just to budget that into it. These are not expensive tools to use. Just make sure it's in your budget and that you understand that there will be costs involved with it. And I'm not sure, things may have changed since I did mine. There may be, some resources available out there for it, but, check with if you're in the military, check to see if your GI Bill covers, so they may cover it as essentially as like cost of tuition and books and things like that. So just kind of look into it and see what's available to you. But just kind of go into it thinking that there will be a bit of a budget involved, but it's usually not anything that should. Well, I mean, who knows with inflation these days?
It is now very common for many of our students to use survey services like the ones that Dr. Sinclair used from Mechanical Turk from Amazon. There's also Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey. I mean, these companies offer these services for a fee, and they will, what they will do is they basically send your invitation to their people in their databases, and you can put conditions. So identify some target demographics and say, so I want just send my invitation to the email only to professionals in the health industry or only IT professionals. The more conditions you put, the more expensive it gets. And of course, you want to also put some geographic conditions, like say, want to the participants only be in the United States. So things like that. The prices vary, again, depending on the conditions, depending on the service. But that's a very expedited way to get participants. We had all kinds of examples in our program. Some students do it in their own companies. It all depends on the permissions, right? If you will need the permissions that IRB needs to approve. The permissions have to be in writing, and that you will present to to IRB. So we have a variety of cases, but as I said, it has been very common for our students to use those services like Mechanical Turk, like the ones that Dr. Sinclair used to reach out to participants. I think that also answers the question from Chantrell, that if you had success with the responses, and what were some of the techniques that you used to attract participants. And again, in this case, he used those services that he had to pay for.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, that looks like it's all of our questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. And for those of you who want some more information on the core webinar series, we have a nice little library. It's been built over the past 7 or 8 years. You can access the link here, and we'll send the slide deck out. And then, Dr. Guzman, thank you again for hosting tonight's presentation.
Thank you very much, Dan.
And Dr. Sinclair, great work on the research. Congratulations on completing your PhD. And echo the comments from a lot of people in the audience. Great work, great research. And again, thank you all who attended for your participation, interest, and great questions. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. Have a great evening. Thank you.